On a quiet evening in Amstelveen, Gwennette Martha steps out of his car. Within seconds, he is surrounded by 3 masked men. They open fire. More than 80 bullets are unleashed on him. The man once seen as the great leader of the Dutch underworld lies lifeless on the asphalt. How could a young boy from Curaçao rise to become one of the most powerful and most feared criminals in the Netherlands? And why did his life end in a storm of violence? This is the true story of Gwennette Martha, the man who shaped an entire generation of criminals and ultimately fell victim to the very system he had built himself. Gwennette Martha. A name whispered for years in the streets of Amsterdam, Antwerp, and Marbella. Not because he was the loudest, but because he was the one who knew everything, controlled everything, and trusted no one. He was the leader of a generation of young criminals who emerged in the early 2000s, smart, structured, invisible. Not a gangster flaunting gold chains, but a strategist with international connections. He worked with some of the biggest names in the underworld: Najib Bobu, Hussein Aitsusan, Benaouf A. But that same network would eventually cause his downfall. His story is that of a boy who, after the murder of his brother, lost his faith in justice. He traded the football field for the street, and the street for the top of the drug trade. His methods, with codes, cell structures, and PGP communication, became the blueprint for what we now call the Mocro Maffia. But where there is power, there is also distrust. And in the world of cocaine and millions in profit, loyalty is rare. In this video, we take you through the life of Gwennette Martha, from his youth in Amsterdam to his bloody end in Amstelveen. A story of loss, betrayal, and absolute power. Gwennette Martha was born on August 10, 1974, in Curaçao. As a child, he was cheerful, social, and above all, athletic. Football was his passion. But behind his smile was a sharp eye for detail. He saw from a young age how injustice worked, at school, on the street, and within his own family. In the 1980s, the Martha family moved to Amsterdam-Zuidoost, a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce and the line between right and wrong was often blurred. Gwennette grew up in an environment where crime was always close. Boys from his class sold hash or ran errands for older criminals. But for a long time, Gwennette seemed to go in a different direction. Until 1992, when his brother Gilbert Martha, nicknamed Killit, was murdered. It was a turning point. Gwennette changed. He withdrew, became harder, emotionally closed off. According to childhood friends, that was when he lost all trust in the justice system. If the law couldn't protect him, then he would protect himself and make his own rules. From that moment, he slid into crime. At first with small things, stealing cars, fraud, burglaries. He was smart, cautious, and knew how to stay out of sight. But it soon became clear that Gwennette was not just another street kid. He was a leader, a thinker, and someone who knew how to make others work for him. In the early 2000s, he began surrounding himself with other young, ambitious criminals. Boys like Najib Bobu and Hussein Aitsusan, who brought their own networks with them. Together they formed the seed of an organization that no longer dealt in petty crime, but in international cocaine trafficking. Gwennette was not a loudmouth, not a fighter in the traditional sense, but he had something rare in the underworld: discipline. He understood logistics, mastered strategy, and carried a near-military structure in his head. For the first time in his life, he had control. But with control came ambition. And with ambition came enemies. In the early 2000s, Gwennette Martha began building a professional criminal empire, not as a brutal street boss, but as a strategic leader. While other criminals flaunted their power with flashy cars and luxurious villas, Gwennette chose an invisible approach. He worked with a tightly organized cell structure. Each team had its own task, from logistics to cash transport, from communication to executions. No one knew the full picture. Only Martha oversaw everything. He communicated through encrypted PGP phones, used code names and signals. Snow meant cocaine. Birds meant people who had to disappear. Meeting meant a murder order. He operated from Amsterdam, Antwerp, and Marbella, but his influence reached as far as Latin America. Martha built connections with Colombian suppliers, and through Surinamese and Spanish intermediaries, he brought in shipments of cocaine to Europe. Often through the port of Antwerp, where he paid corrupt dock workers to let containers pass unnoticed. During this period, he also became closer with Benaouf A. Benaouf was young, driven, and connected to the new generation of street criminals. Gwennette saw him as a pawn he could use, someone who gave him access to young soldiers willing to do anything for money and status. The cooperation with Benaouf and others brought in millions. Martha reinvested the money in real estate in Spain, car import businesses, grocery stores, and even legal courier services. Everything revolved around laundering money and leaving no traces. But while his network grew, so did the unrest. Within the group, tensions rose over money, power, and decisions. Some members thought Martha was too controlling. Others felt his time was over. At this stage, the network became vulnerable. One lost shipment, one missing container of cocaine, one suspicion of betrayal, and everything could collapse. What Martha had built seemed unshakable, but beneath the surface, an explosive cocktail of egos, interests, and old grudges was brewing. In 2012, everything escalated. A shipment of cocaine, worth millions, disappeared without a trace in the port of Antwerp. Panic struck Martha's network. Fingers were pointed, rumors spread, and distrust deepened. According to prosecutors and crime journalists, a deep rift formed between Martha and his former protégé, Benaouf A. What began as a crisis of trust quickly turned into a fight for life and death. Martha suspected Benaouf of playing his own game, holding back shipments and leaking information. Benaouf, in turn, believed Martha was keeping profits from him, limiting his power, and refusing to treat him as an equal. The bond of trust that had once been so close turned into pure hatred. On October 18, 2012, Najib Boo, one of Martha's oldest and most loyal friends, was gunned down in Antwerp. The hit was professional, the attack precise. Authorities held Benaouf's camp responsible. For Gwennette, the message was clear. This was no mistake. This was a statement, and he would respond. What followed would later be described in the media as the start of the Mocro War, a deadly conflict between two criminal factions, both with young, heavily armed soldiers, both with millions of euros in cocaine interests at stake. In the months that followed, there were countless shootings and murder attempts. Martha narrowly survived an attack near the Okura Hotel in Amsterdam. Youngsters from both sides were gunned down in cold drive-by shootings. Street gangs in Amsterdam West and New West chose sides. Weapons were passed around like handbags. Gwennette Martha went into hiding, but he kept giving orders. By then he was internationally wanted, but he operated from Marbella, Brussels, and Tangier. His instructions were sent via PGP phones and couriers. He trusted no one, except for a handful of loyal bodyguards. But as he hid, the underworld was changing. New players like Ridouan Taghi saw their chance. The old guard, including Martha, found themselves increasingly on the defensive. And Gwennette knew, if he didn't win this war, he wouldn't survive it. After barely surviving a hit near the chic Okura Hotel in Amsterdam, Gwennette Martha realized his time on Dutch soil was over. He disappeared completely from sight, but not from the game. From the shadows, he continued to pull the strings. According to prosecutors, he moved between Morocco, Spain, and Belgium, with Marbella as his main base of operations. There, he kept multiple safe houses, surrounded by guards and stocked with weapons, cash, and encrypted communication equipment. He lived a shadowy life, constantly moving, trusting no one, and living almost paranoid. Still, he remained active. He ordered hits, like the murder of a young Amsterdam criminal in Diemen. He managed cocaine shipments through the ports of Algeciras and Antwerp, and according to police, he maintained contact with old confidants in the Dutch and Belgian underworld. But Martha felt the pressure rising. His organization began to crack. Rivals drew blood. And the police, who had by then decrypted PGP chats, were closing in. The Criminal Intelligence Unit had several reports that he was back in the Netherlands. Why he eventually returned to Amsterdam remains uncertain to this day. Some say he wanted to broker peace, to negotiate a ceasefire with his enemies. Others believe he felt cornered and saw no other way out. What is certain? On May 22, 2014, Gwennette Martha stepped out of his black BMW in a parking lot in Amstelveen. Within seconds, 3 masked men in a gray BMW approached. They opened fire, more than 80 bullets. Martha didn't stand a chance. His body was identified at the scene. The assassination was brutal, fast, and public. A statement. The attacker's car was later found burned out in Diemen. The masterminds remain unknown to this day, but the message was clear. The king of the old network had been eliminated. With his death came the end of the Gwennette Martha era, but not his influence. Because although Martha lies buried, his name still lives on in the Dutch underworld. His methods became a blueprint, cell structures where no one knew the full picture, encrypted communication via PGP, later Sky ECC, iron loyalty combined with ruthless violence. Young criminals saw him as an icon, not a loudmouth, not a showman, but a man of vision, structure, and discipline. In neighborhoods like Amsterdam West, Canalen Island, and Antwerp North, his name is still spoken with both respect and fear. But his story is also a warning. He built an empire on power, but lost control to mistrust. He created a network, but couldn't protect it from internal conflict. And in the end, like so many before and after him, he was crushed by the system he helped build. His death cleared the way for a new generation. Ridouan Taghi, Saeed Razouki, and others who refined and expanded Martha's structure. The war he started still rages on to this day.